Hello and welcome to the No Holds Barred Witchcraft podcast, sponsored by Little Chef. Chris, on the road to hell, was you aware that there is a Little Chef?
I remember there being places to stop and eat. I don't remember it being a Little Chef.
There is a Little Chef where you're guaranteed to pick up two friends on your way to hell, Sam and Ella.
Twat.
I'll leave it at that. So, today we're talking all about my space, right? Because I've got a space, and
Oh, it's messy.
you, of course, have a space, and we all have a spaces that we like to set up for our magic and the like. So, if you're lucky, then Chris might invite you over to see his space. And then you're going to make the magic happen. Isn't that right, Chris?
You're a knob. You're just a knob.
Is that not right? Does any magic happen in your space?
Lots of magic happens in my space.
So it ain't a Wiccan space then?
No.
What I understand of the Wiccan space is they consecrate it. And then that's it. They just go home. Or no, they have their cakes and ale, don't they?
Cakes and ale. And explain to each other where they bought their velour from.
Yeah, so if you didn't get it and don't understand, my space equals sacred spaces, magical working spaces. So that's what we're talking about today. We're talking about sacred space. Hashtag sacred space, Chris, yeah? So,
Hashtag faces.
what would your understanding of what sacred space is? Because I think there's such a thing as sacred space, and there's such a thing as a sacred space. And I say that those two things are different, if I'm honest. But I'm interested in your opinions of things.
Well, I would say a sacred place is somewhere that remains sacred at all times. So it's a permanent space that is however magically inclined it may be. So that can be anything from, you'll get these wish trees in the middle of a forest where all those Wiccans like to tie bits of plastic ribbon.
But what
and
makes
things like
it
that.
sacred?
That would be
What makes it sacred? Is it the more ribbons that's tied to the tree, the more sacred it is?
I think it's all about the intention, Liam.
It's all about the intention. Of course it is, Chris. That's where I'm going wrong. It's all about the intention, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, like that Lady Poison says, it's all about the intention.
Right, okay. So sacred spaces for a magical work, then, for magical workings. Was that sort of a sacred space, then?
So sacred space, as in not a sacred space, but sacred space, would be referring to any space created for a magical working that is temporary.
Okay, so what is the
that
purpose?
Would be the difference for me.
What's the purpose of creating a sacred space? Because you don't need to create sacred space in order to have cakes and ale, do you?
You don't now. You could just go to a pub.
You could. That's sacred in itself, the pub.
It is for a Brit, yeah. The reason we talk about it is more a case of what you've discussed before, which is creating the right environment, I think is the word you normally use, and has a hospitable environment for whatever you are inviting in, or if you are creating a space in order to flood a space with a particular kind of energy. So that would be creating an environment. Obviously, the reason those Wiccans like to cast their circles is about sacred space. I'm just not sure they actually understand what that actually means. So when you're creating a space in order to hold a working, you are creating a boundary first and foremost. So obviously we would say that a magical circle is just a pictorial representation of the aura, but essentially what I'm talking about is sacred space. So just drawing a circle and calling the corners does not necessarily make a sacred space. So it's about having a space that you can work a particular kind of magic in. So that sacred space might change every time. It might just be your set of boundaries that you set up whenever you work with any particular kind of energy. It's about creating a space in which you can work.
So what I think in terms of, if you're talking about that Wiccan idea of casting a circle and calling in the elements, that's what I call basically attention seeking on multiple levels. Because not only is it attention seeking from the fact you've got to wear your crushed velvet and say, oh, look at me, I'm holding a ritual, I'm doing some magic, it's also sacred space casting in the form of like what the Wiccans do. It's also attention seeking because you're not bringing in energies, are you? Because the energies are already there, the elements are already there. What you're actually saying is, hey, look at me, pay me attention. You're calling upon the air or the wind and the water and the like. All that stuff's already there, Chris. So really what you're doing is you're saying, I'm a Wiccan and you're not paying enough attention to me. So come a bit closer. I want to feel you're there. Yeah, so it's kind of like if you've got like a crowd of people and they're all milling about doing their everyday things, because the wind's got stuff to do, Chris. You know, the wind has got things to do. It's got things to blow. It's busy. Wind is a very busy thing, right? And yet it's not going to pay you a lot of attention unless there's something going on, right? So what they say is they say, hey, look at me. Or in Wiccan speak, that's, I call to the quarter of the wind, come the wind, come to me. And that. And then you just get a... Because there's a bunch of Neo-Pagans, and I have noticed that there is an awful lot of Neo-Pagans out there that have got flatulence problems for an unhealthy diet. But we should do a podcast all about that. In fact, I think that there is one on the list, isn't there, all to do with that.
I think so.
That my body is a temple. How many people do you want to fit in your temple? But anyway, that might be a Patreon only one. So, to cut a long story short, the creation of sacred space is really creating an environment and an ecosystem, the correct environment for the thing you want to manifest, to do some work in that. Is not, I suppose, in some respects, some people would refer to it as almost like your desktop, either on your computer or your actual desktop. You're cleaning it away and then you're starting to do some work, right? When actually, it's more, I think, about the boundaries, right? And it's more about, okay, we're keeping a containment on this energy, and then we're filling it up with a very specific type of energy that's relevant to what we're doing. So it's a lot more like jars that I like to keep and collect. I put different things in the jars, right? And those jars are full of different things. You know, if I want to catch a fish, this is the secrets of evocation. So pay attention, listeners. If I want to get a fish... Fishes are not comfortable out of water. Okay, so you need to get them with the net, and then you need to put them in the water, right? So they still survive. So they stay on land. They can stay on land if they're in a little bucket of water or something. But it's got to be the right sort of water. Okay, that's the problem.
So have I got to do this in the bath?
That's where people go wrong. Like if it's saltwater fish, you can't put that in fresh water because it dies. They don't understand the nuances that are there, Chris. So you are calling in a spirit that don't belong here. It's not belonging here. Some spirits belong here, others don't. But if you're calling on a spirit that don't belong here, it's going to struggle to manifest and the like. So you need to create a nice little ecosystem, which is your sacred space that's filled with that salt water. There's a saltwater fish, saltwater spirit, whatever. And then that way it's easier for things to manifest. You'll see this in lots of rituals and the like. You'll see that a lot of people go to great lengths to call upon and bring in spirits that are very, very far away. And I'm not talking distance, I'm talking magical geographics on a multi-dimensional level. Because There's the spirits and the like. This local, what we call local spirits, Chris. Yeah, not the one from the park down the road, and not the ones from the drink cabinet. We're talking like things that are of this current physical universe. They're close by.
Yeah. Elementals and things.
And then there's things that are a little bit further outside of that, like the Fae. A little bit further outside. Different universe, technically, but close enough and similar enough for them to kind of do some troublemaking and mischief making here. And then there's things that are really, really far away, like trans-Plutonian type things. That are very much outside of the scope of what's currently in this world. And you see the dangers with trying to call upon things like this. You see a lot of people in the left-hand path, Chris, that try to deal with this sort of crap, don't you? They get it really wrong, go insane.
Definitely.
Is that you need to think, if you're pulling another place, and that place is very opposed to where we currently are, if that place is like mass cancelling mass, if that place is a bigger, denser thing, and you pull it in and you're successful, poof goes the universe we're in. It's quite dangerous. If it's a little less dense, then it can start to, flood in and that, which does cause problems in itself. It's kind of like when you put a magnet next to your phone in there, it goes all crazy. Like that. But if you establish a boundary, and you make a proper boundary, not one of these crappy little boundaries that the beginners use, like a proper solid boundary, we could go into that later, that will stop the impact, stop that thing that you're pulling in, whether it's a spirit or another place, won't open up a doorway to the underworld or something and let that energy flood through. You're creating a little barrier. It's kind of a no man's land, isn't it? Your sacred space is somewhere between the physical world and somewhere between the world where that spirit you are calling resides, or just that world that you're trying to pull in. So I like to get the beginners to do planetary ones. So to evoke, you can call upon planetary spirits and the like. You could call Jupiter, or you could call Zeus, or you could open a direct and evoke and pull in the energy from that planetary energy itself. So not sentience, just open the floodgates to the Jupiterian realm, say, and allow that to flood in. And the good thing about that is not only is it conducive to doing Jupiterian type work, but also because the energies are flooding around you, you get to pick up these energies, I think, don't you, Chris? You get to learn what they feel like and that, and then when you see them in the future going about your business and you say, I see that and I know what that is because it's Jupiterian, because I've experienced that before. It's like not scratch tested, it's more of an immersive experience, like when you take babies swimming for the first time and you have to dunk their heads in the water. I know that because I did lifeguard, and that's a legitimate thing, right? You do that. You have to...
Drowning babies.
You put the little floats in the babies, like their, swimming costume things with these little floats in, and then you start taking each float out one at a time, and then you splash a little bit of water on his face. Not all in the same, swimming lesson, but obviously like over the weeks and months. Splash a little water so it gets comfortable with a bit of water in his face, and then you take and you dunk it under. And then eventually you start to put the armbands on when it can move about, when it's like a toddler and that. Little kid. And then you start to slowly deflate the armbands, which basically means you don't blow them up all as much each time, to the point where you've got these deflated armbands, and then you say to the kid, because the kid, they don't want to take the armbands off, Chris, they want to leave them on. It's like bloody weaning people off of rattles and that. They don't want to take it off, so you just say, I'm sorry, kid. There's a puncture, that's why in inflating, so you can put them on but they ain't getting blown up, and eventually they dispense with it. So there we go, that's how you teach children to swim. 101 lesson. But that ain't got much to do with sacred space, or has it? Ooh. Ooh. Read between the lines, as they say. You do some talking now, Chris.
I was going to say, you're going to take a breath. So, but no, it's one of those things that should be one of the first things that are taught when you're starting out on a path like this. But it's often not. They talk about doing their protections, or they talk about cleansing, but they don't talk about creating sacred space. and actually understanding what that actually means, which is a combination, the first two I've already said, and then obviously bringing in whatever you're wanting to bring into that space. And what I don't think people can give enough consideration to is, like you say, is that environment that you want to access, what you want to pull through, is that able to come through, and actually is the reason your spell's not working properly, or you're not experiencing what you're supposed to be experiencing, is because actually you've not created a harmonious space that can actually come in. And I don't think people think about it, particularly those psychics, because I suppose this extends out to them too, why they're so scared of things like Ouija boards and pendulums, is often because they don't have an understanding of what that is. Like, what about, well, I've opened a portal into absolutely Neverland, and you're kind of like, well, one, have you got the actual understanding enough to be able to open such a portal, or is it actually going to be, arranged by the other side? Because I think that's what most people would fail to understand when it comes to those, is, are you opening a portal up, or actually have you all just accidentally allowed something that was local, that happened to thought, oh, that looks like a new place to play with. They've opened a small hole, let's just make it a little bit bigger. And it's one of those things that often comes out when you realise that they've then, left it open for several weeks, even though they did the closing down ritual. I just realised no one else can see me doing the bunny ears. I suddenly realised there's only you that's actually can see me.
Yeah, we're on the podcast, Chris. That's just audio.
On the podcast.
Yeah.
Just audio. Yeah. So what was I saying? Something about Ouija boards. Oh yeah. And then, people find out they've made a connection that's, tormenting them weeks later, is because they haven't actually thought about what they're doing before they're doing it, and actually how they create and manage, because that's the big part of it. It's all well and good you creating, sacred space, but you need to be able to close that shit down when you're done doing what you're supposed to be doing. And actually that kind of opening and closing part of creating any kind of space like that is the most important bit, and you should have actually learned that as part of your basic training. I would hope all good teachers would. I'm not convinced that all they do. I think partly it's one of those things that the Cunningham books, etc., don't seem to cover. It's kind of assumed with a lot of these books that you understand something so basic. I think that's why so many people have trouble with cleansings and things like that, is because the concept's never explained to them. They assume that you use the word cleansing or protection and you understand what those words mean. Whereas actually I don't think a lot of beginners even consider it, because they can't see it or they can't necessarily hear it. Therefore, they're just saying words and drawing circles on the ground. There isn't an actual understanding of what that means to create space. And I'm sure we'll come back to that in a sec. I do want to kind of jump back over to
Neverland.
Sacred places.
Well, I was going to say, it is dangerous, like you say, opening up a doorway to Neverland. Just ask Macaulay Culkin. Talk about a doorway being opened and a hole getting bigger.
Wow, Liam. Wow. We're not even on the Patreon yet for you to say shit like that.
No, and just imagine listeners that don't subscribe to the Patreon, what a laugh the Thoth Witchcraft Patreon actually is, and that really you should pay the £3 or £4 or however much it is. It's not very expensive. It's about the price of a magazine. Yeah. You should buy a subscription.
And come and listen to Liam's potty mouth. So yeah, I was kind of going to jump over a little bit again to sacred places. Maybe that's the definition of the split you make between sacred spaces, creating a sacred space, and kind of sacred places. And by that I don't mean necessarily what we were talking about before with a tree or a temple or whatever. That is any kind of permanent space. So if you have an altar at home, that is a permanent sacred space. So you may still kind of switch it on and off, as in when you allow it to be active, but it is a permanent space. Why are you sniggering to yourself?
Because because now we've talked about Michael Jackson and Macaulay Culkin. That means that's now relevant to this podcast, which means for the YouTube thumbnail I can use that Macaulay Culkin face and put a witch's hat on him.
Okay, you have fun with that. So talking about sacred places and spaces in that kind of context, is that considering those any altar space that you create, unless there is an active on-off switch, that you have a protocol for opening that space, it works very much similar in the terms of the Ouija boards that I was just talking about before, is that unless you have a proper way of activating and kind of the on-off switch part, then you're obviously going to still be dealing with the after effects of opening a space up like that. And obviously maintaining that portal open close is a big part of your kind of housekeeping that should kind of be occurring if you're using altar spaces. Is also the reason why you should always be careful about what deities you are mixing about on an altar space. So if you're, particularly when you've got certain kind of neo-pagan groups and where they start to mix pantheons, and they'll pick, I don't know, Osiris, and then mix him up with Hecate or something like that, and you kind of go, those two are a nice mix. They both deal with the same sorts of currents, so that would work. If you then swapped Hecate out for Aphrodite, or something like that, you're then starting to go, okay, are the two coherent? Do they actually understand each other? Are they going to be okay with sharing a sacred space? Because just because you've consecrated two separate pieces of, what are they made of now? Resin from Nemesis now, does not suddenly mean that you have a safe space within each of the idols. They are creating an open space as part of an altar setup. So this is where I kind of struggle with some of the kind of neo-pagan and Wiccan ideas, where they'll kind of swap in and out deities throughout the year. So you kind of they'll celebrate different arrangements throughout the year, but they never create a space that is designed for that. I don't think they ever consider what that actually looks like. It's fine when you have a kind of polarities arrangement with a masculine and a feminine representation, as long as that fits the entire year. As how those two interact as the seasons change. I don't think when they're selecting, again, I did the bunny ears again, selecting these couples that are not actually couples, that they actually consider what those combinations mean in real terms. How does that flow through a year, and how would the two interact if they were people, and kind of personifying them and breaking them down into, okay, well, if these two people were cohabiting on a space, how does that work? And you get a lot of these kind of eclectic insta witches that all talk about kind of these are my patron deities, and that sort of thing, and they're arranging where actually think of that altar space as if it was a sacred grove or a temple, that everything in that space should have the energies, and what was that phrase you used earlier about environment, Liam?
The environment and the habitat and the like. If a spirit is from a place that's its habitat, the energy's there. I know when you were talking about that and those people and the Neo-Pagans and that mix about all the spirits and the pantheons and stuff, I just had visions of Lilith trying to convince Hestia while she's reading a Mills and Boon book to come to the local strip club with her to watch the local group of male strippers, and Hestia's not up for it. She just wants a quiet night in beside the fire.
Exactly. It's just it's about bringing that environment in. If you are hoping that and this is the thing, and they then wonder why they don't get their petitions answered, because they don't think about the foods that they might want, or it's one of those things that you either go down and I know I'm going off on a tangent, Liam, but I'm on a bit of a rant, as you can tell. When it comes to offering and sacrifice. So when it comes to sacrifice, that is about what is relative to you. When you are talking about offering, you are talking about what's relevant to the deity you are working with. So, it might be that actually Santa Muerte doesn't fancy cigars this week, and you haven't actually considered what is the right offering to be giving at that particular time of year, or that particular moment, or what kind of work you've been doing with her, is very different to going, okay, I've got these Cubans, I've only got 3 left, and actually that is a great sacrifice to give over to a deity that would appreciate tobacco.
She likes Werther's originals.
Werther's originals.
Well, it reminds her of all the old ladies and men that she read.
Oh, okay. I was thinking, how does she suck on them? Is what I was thinking.
I don't think she does.
Do they not get?
I think she
stuck in her teeth?
them in with a handful of Werther's originals, and the old biddies that come too close, and then all of a sudden, with her scythe is. That's how I do it.
I like.
Someone's getting old when they're carrying around Werther's originals in their handbag.
Okay.
Especially if it's a bloke.
I'm with you on that. Okay. Was there anything of use, any golden nuggets that you wanted to push further from what I just said, or were you just enjoying the rant?
I enjoy the rant. I do enjoy your rants. But going back to what you said quite a lot earlier in regards to the books and that telling you about sacred space, because there's a lot of them that make a big issue about it. And this is the thing that I think people miss. Either the book makes too big an issue about sacred space, or it just don't cover it at all. So the people that don't cover it at all, what they miss, the readers and that, they might they might miss out, okay, I need to pull in some energy to make something happen, okay, to make an ecosystem, particularly when it comes to evocation. This is quite important with some spirits. But the other ones that make too big a deal out of it, then people think, well, you don't need to make sacred space in order to make the magic happen, which is true, you don't. Because they're missing completely the concept of you create sacred space to hold energies, like a vessel for holding a certain energy. Now, we both work in the rooms that we're both currently sat in, actually, and they retain energy and stuff like that. If you go out and did some work in the forest, that kind of stuff's probably going to dissipate quicker, but it might leave a little bit of a mark or a stain on the land for a little while if you don't wash it clean and the like. So really what you're talking about is, are you needing, if I want to pick up some water, it helps to get a glass to go and pick that water up so that it retains and keeps that energy all in one place. Also, it stops that water, if it's not water, if it's something like red wine, it stops that from going all over the floor because it's contained within that vessel. So in terms of a stain in the carpet, stain in the land, and stain in various things, you can create a vessel boundary to stop that energy from working, pushing out. Really, you need to understand the energies that you're working with in order to decide whether you need or whether it's a good idea to create sacred space. Because I don't create sacred space. I'm happy to just pull in energies and then I'll get rid of them and scrub them out afterwards if I need to. A lot of the time I don't even do that, as you know. It just builds up to like get rid of it with me weekly cleaning. But there we go. I think that's it for this week's edition of the podcast.